Good evening, everyone. I call to order the Victoria City Council workshop meeting on Tuesday, November 12th at 5:30. Tonight, we're going to be having a workshop on the proposed 2020 budget. And with that, let me turn it over to Tricia. Tricia, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This evening's workshop is going to be focused on the capital improvement plan and the enterprise funds budgets. We're going to have our department heads here to answer any real specific questions relating to those funds and those capital purchases that are in the 5-year plan. Please note that we do also, staff does go out 10 years minimum for the CIP. But this evening, we're just going to have the 5-year plan because that will be what you'll be adopting this year. If you do have questions about past the 5 years, we can answer those questions too, though. So we'll start with the capital improvement plan. Again, that it's the 5-year plan. The CIP adoption doesn't mean automatic approval. Any project costing more than $10,000 will be going to council for approval. Projects for the 2020 are included in the line item budgets that we'll be showing you tonight. And projects for 2020 through 2024 are adopted conceptually. Adequate funding is planned for all projects. The first fund we're looking at is the general fund. We don't have anything in for 2020 for any purchases. The next purchases would be in 2021.
Just real quick. By the way, do you prefer we hold our questions to the end or just ask as we go through? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. You can ask as we go through.
Just real quick, the warning siren west of Lake Bridge, is that if Lake Bridge continues to expand west? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
So, good evening, Mayor, Council. Yes, that would fill the future development needs if and when that expansion or the city grows west of Lake Bridge. So we're covered. The Lake Bridge neighborhood is right on the fringe of our coverage area today, so anything further west of that would need an additional siren installed.
Got it. So if we don't go west, then that would just sit there, we'd push it out to whenever it does.
Yep, so it's kind of development driven at this time, so.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Trish, please.
And the next fund would be the Capital Public Works Equipment Fund. For 2020, there is a pickup truck replacement, a dump truck replacement, and a sidewalk machine, which is used for snow removal. Those items, again, will be coming to you for approval as the purchases come up.
Is the sidewalk, excuse me, is the sidewalk machine a replacement or what, or did you have a different type of machine before?
Are we talking a snow blower?
What is a sidewalk machine?
It's a good question. Good evening, Council and Mr. Mayor. If we haven't met, I'm Dave Shogrum, the new Public Works Director. So some of you I've met, but I haven't met all of you yet. The sidewalk machine is a snow blower. It is probably going to be a multi-use tool. There are lots of different variations available, and we're kind of starting to do the research right now into that product and trying to figure out what might be the best item for us. But primarily, its intention is for more adequately and more completely clearing the snow off of our sidewalks, especially downtown, and then going up County Road 11 where we do get a lot of heavy snow that's from the wake of the county trucks that go by and push all the heavy snow up onto the sidewalk there. So it is not a replacement, it's an additional tool. It would be an improvement over the tools that we are currently using, and the idea is that it could be more efficient and more complete in its job than the tools that we are currently using.
So is this like a Bobcat, or is it bigger, or what?
It's actually narrower than a Bobcat. That's kind of the problem with the Bobcats that we use currently. If we have got a very heavy snow, we'll bring a Bobcat onto the sidewalks, and they just are too wide. We end up doing a lot of sod damage, a lot of damage to the landscaping, things like that, and they're not incredibly efficient at that. I mean, they are very good at a lot of things that they do. Sidewalks don't happen to be the best thing for them. So.
Got it?
Thanks.
And we're getting 2 of those? Oh, no, that's a priority too, sorry. So Mayor, members of the council, before you pass it back to Tricia, I just feel like I want to say something for the benefit of the public. You all know those things, but for anybody who's watching us at home, just to give a little context on the CIP itself. So you're approving the plan. This is our long-term financial plan. We're looking out at some of the larger purchases that we have to be making in order to operate the city as efficiently as possible. And when these purchases come up, your budget controls, your policies still apply. So just because you approve the plan doesn't mean that you approve the purchase. We will be bringing back to you a staff report justifying the need. And the other thing that we do, just because it shows up in the plan in a particular year, doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to purchase that. There may be, some of these things are in here for 5 years. In something that's in program for 2024 or 2025, there could be different equipment that comes through, different models. You saw this with the mini pumper truck, where we said, we really think that there's value in actually going from 2 vehicles to 1. We've got some cost savings. So those are the types of things that we're going to be looking at and that the team is looking at when we're having these conversations. So we're presenting to you a plan, what we think we need. We're evaluating that throughout the course of the year, and as those purchases come closer, we'll be making decisions. Sometimes we do something different. We try to stay within that budget and come in lower when we can, or we'll look at different ways to deliver those services that might eliminate or reduce those costs as well. So just something, you all know this because we're in front of you talking about this regularly, but for those who may be watching us this evening, we wanted to provide just a layer of context to that.
I think that was a very polite way to ask us to quit interrupting electricity.
It was absolutely not. We love questions. And as you all know, that's what we're here to do, make sure that you have the information to make the decisions, so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Any other questions on the capital equipment before we move on? Okay. Okay, so the fire department capital equipment, as you probably remember, we did do the prepayment for the 2020 purchase of the mini pumper in order to have some benefits of some savings in that. Some other equipment that we're kind of looking at is the 2022. As you can see, there's a ladder truck purchase that we're looking at, which could still be moved out as well. Any questions on the fire?
Do we currently have a ladder truck, or is this something?
Oh, sorry, that's an engine replacement.
Oh, and I'm sorry, an
So that's
engine.
replacing a truck today.
Okay.
Okay, so for the parks, we have, for 2020, every other year, we plan $50,000 for trail renovations. Those are existing trails, so that's separate from the trail gaps. We did put in the Wasserman Lake Park purchase, and we're looking at the paving of the Lions Park parking lot as well for 2020. And part of those funds would come from the charitable gambling fund, which is, so it's broken out 270,000 from the park fund and 80,000 from the gambling fund.
It costs that much money to pave that parking lot?
Ann, can you?
Yeah, sure, Mayor and Council. Basically, right now, the parking lot as it sits today is a gravel parking lot with a lot of frost boils in it, much like Marsh Lake Road had frost boils in it. So it would be a complete construction of the park, which would include stormwater, curb gutter, and then paving, and the sub-base underneath. And it would require some removal of the existing gravel today.
Is this is the parking lot at Poppitt's Field?
Yes, this is the middle
Not
parking
by
lot.
the pavilion.
Yeah, correct. It's the main big parking lot in kind of the central portion of the park.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
And then we move on to the trail gaps. There Anne just had began plugging in some different plans that she had recommendations from the Parks and Rec Committee. So now we have a plan of use of funds for that transfer that we're doing each year. Okay, the downtown redevelopment is a TIF fund, and we were looking at the old public works site, making a parking lot improvement there, of using those funds of $330,000, and then possibly upgrading the sidewalks to be ADA compliant at $150,000. That would deplete that TIF pooling that we have available.
That's 100% of our TIF pooling?
That would take care of, from that TIF District 3, the pooling money, yes.
Is there any other dollars available from any other TIF district?
Not currently.
These are residual dollars.
Yes,
The
that's
projects
correct.
are over.
That's correct. So these funds, with talking to Tammy Amdahl, our financial advisor, while the funds don't have to be necessarily spent this year, she said that it would be good to think about spending those funds, then we can close out the fund. And we don't need to worry about reporting after it's closed, so this would take care of it.
Those in the public that may not know, that 330,000 earmarked to clean up the old public works sites and pave it, or is it?
Yes, that would be a portion of, we don't have the total cost of what it will cost us, but that's how much funds we would have available
Okay, got it. Earmarked
for that project. So it could be more than that.
So we're gonna clean it up, or I thought we were gonna just pave over it?
Well, you gotta level it. No.
Well, no, I'm talking about
I meant
cleaning up.
clean up the excess equipment, not clean up the dump, but clean up the excess equipment and the other stuff that's there. Move it over to the new public works sites or access it.
So, Mayor, members of the council, if I may, to answer that question, we haven't done any preliminary design work on this. We haven't, so this is our best guess based on funds that we have available to us. And so when we talked about this initially earlier in the year and accelerating this from our CIP, this used to be in 2023 in the CIP, and there's $17,000 that we believe it's going to take to get the easement title work cleaned up. And then we've got to demo the building, we've got to figure out how to construct the lot in a way to maximize the use of parking, and you're gonna be having a conversation on the 25th about yard waste, and that could be a potential site if you wanna continue to do yard waste. So we would have to think about how all those things play together. But what you're seeing here with the $330,000, we're not suggesting that it's gonna cost that. It may cost less, it may cost more, we don't know yet. What we're showing here is that your plan, you've got a funding source that isn't going to touch your tax levy.
Yep,
This
got it.
funding
It's cash in the
source
bank.
is, and with TIF pooling dollars, you have to be careful that you're using that towards an authorized use, and that authorized use comes from when you adopted the resolution to create the TIF district. And so there has to be a nexus, and it has to that TIF district. And so this is a good use. You've got a plan, you've got a vision, and we've got there's knockdown rules, 5-year rules, 6, there's all sorts of rules with TIF. And so our financial advisor monitors those things for us and advises us on, okay, if you've got a project, now would be a good time to start thinking about that. And then to Tricia's point about reporting, there's overhead costs to having a district. Reporting costs money. And so we got an opportunity to close that out and achieve one of your strategic goal objectives. And we can do that, and we've got a funding source at least partially to fund, if not fully, so.
Isn't there a timing limit also as to when these funds have to be spent?
Yes, that's correct.
So how much? time
We're
do we have?
close. It's not like tomorrow we need to be, but it's, our financial advisor said we're getting close to being down, is it the 6-year rule or 5-year rule? One of those rules the 5-year rule that we need to be thinking about how to spend these funds.
So just to be clear, this project includes what, tearing down the building?
So we've not fully identified that scope yet, and that's because it's in 2020. You haven't adopted the budget yet, and so we're starting to think about what that might look like, and we'll be bringing you some decision points. But yes, as far as from planning perspective and from the direction that we've received, yes, it's going to require demolition of that
So you
building.
have to level it off and put in base material, but there's not gonna be any soil remediation
If
at all.
not that we're aware of. If you're just planning to use that as a parking lot, there may not be a need to do the remediation.
Right, when I was referring to cleanup, there's stuff the city owns, bricks and
Yeah,
excess
junk.
equipment. Right,
Junk.
that's what I meant by cleanup, is removing that out of there, and then take down the building. Plus, there'll have to be a survey, and the council hasn't even selected the design yet, so all of that, we can use this money for all of that, all of those steps.
I wouldn't doubt if it's gonna go the whole thing.
All right,
Okay, so moving on to the plan, capital improvement plan for streets. There's quite a bit going on here, and we do have some questions under our next slides coming up that I think will address some of your questions, and we can kind of incorporate those together, if that's okay. Because there's just a lot of feedback that we're looking for from council on several of these projects. So this is just kind of a snapshot for future projects, but we definitely want to talk about them. And then the utility funds, we've got the sewer fund. There is a grinder pump for a lift station, some upgrades to lift station 18. The south area sewer improvement, of course, is something that has been pushed over from 2019 and is something that the council will be discussing tonight. Lift station 11, and we always plan for some oversizing from developments. The water, again, there is the south area extension and the well number 5 project, and a emergency portable generator also for 2020.
How much of this, if we look at the huge expenditures that are here,
Mm-hmm.
how many are coming out of other funds and just transferred in here to pay for this versus having to bond or do something like that?
Right, so we're not transferring from other funds. We are going to use some bonding and some cash. And when we look at that specific budget, you'll see that plan that we have
Cash
for
is
that.
sitting in a fund right now.
Sorry?
The cash that you're going to use is sitting in, that's my question, is which fund?
Yes, we have cash in those funds to make some of these purchases. Okay? So here we're going to start with the question and discussions. This kind of goes back to what we touched on with the TIF 3. And we're asking, is the council comfortable with using TIF pooling funds from TIF 3 to fund a portion of the parking improvements, in addition to the downtown ADA sidewalk improvements? Are there any comments on that?
Seems like a reasonable use of funds to me.
Okay.
Same here.
Sounds good.
Agree.
oh, well, I'll make it unanimous. We want to do, how much, do we have any other funds available? The only thing I'm thinking about is, we have to pay for Marsh Lake Road. We don't have I saw, what was it, 2.8 million or 2.85 or something that was in here. Do we know how accurate that number is?
Kara can answer that.
We're getting close to those totals, right?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We're getting close to having actual numbers. What we did for this was we took the option 3 number that we had presented to you and then added a number for the trail. So it's pretty speculative as a accumulation of two numbers. So we're getting close, probably.
That's an order of magnitude?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So the reason I ask that is, what's the total amount of TIF dollars that we have available? Because I want to minimize bonding wherever we can. And I absolutely want to do the parking lot. I think there's a lot of need for that now. But I'm just wondering, so we have all of these immediate requirements, plus let's not forget Wasserman Park, right, which was unfunded and all of a sudden came out of the blue. I'm trying to think about how many dollars we actually found cash in the bank and where do we prioritize this? Because we want all of those projects, but we just don't have unlimited cash, and we may have to make some tough choices there. So is there additional TIF funds other than this TIF 3 that's available for some of these projects, or is this the only funds?
Mayor, Council, the TIF funds, that would be the total that we have available, the
That's all?
480.
That's all of the cash?
Yeah, and it does need to be used for a specific purpose in the redevelopment. Yeah, so it wouldn't be something we could use to do a park or a project such as that.
Couldn't use it for Marsh Lake Road either?
No, it would need to be used within the district. And we talked to our financial advisor, and we mentioned the parking lot. And she thought that would be a perfect use of those funds, and that they would qualify for that.
All right, thank you. That answers the
Curiosity,
question.
is this the Wentzman condo, TIF 3?
Yes, I believe it would be this district right in here.
Right, that's what I thought.
Okay, so now we're going to go back to look at the long-term street maintenance fund. So this is a fund that the purpose is to be pay-go for street overlays. We do a transfer from the general fund each year to support this fund. There are $11 million in needs over the next 10 years. And we do have some pedestrian crossings that are currently unfunded. The strategic plan calls for 1 or 2 pedestrian crossings to be completed in 2020. And so our question tonight is, does the council wish to delay future overlays or increase the general fund transfer to fund pedestrian crossings out of that long-term street maintenance fund? The pedestrian crossing at County Road 11 is anticipated to cost $588,400.
Is that up at
That's,
11, 18, and 43? Is that what you're talking about? Where is this?
no, this is that Deer Run going across.
Correct. Mayor, members of the city council, if you recall some time ago, must have been within the last year or so, the county submitted a grant application on our behalf to upgrade the crossing both by the church and then down at the intersection of, as noted, Deer Run Drive and 86th Street. At that time, a consultant prepared an estimate for that work. That's where we're getting the $588,000. The county was not successful in obtaining those grant funds. So if we're looking to move forward with a project in 2020, we would need to figure out how to fund it. The county is in the process of developing a cost participation policy for crossings such as this, so there's the potential for the county to participate in this, so our share may not be 100% of that $588,000, but we don't have that
Why would we
information yet.
assume that it'd be 100%?
On a county road.
It's a-
I don't want to speak for the county, so they don't yet have historically improvements of these type were funded by the city.
Really?
But the county recognizes the need to participate in these types of crossing projects, so thus, and I don't know if you have any updated information from the administrators group, the staff, lower level staff hasn't had an update for quite some time on where they are with the developing that policy, but they do recognize that it would be appropriate for the county to participate in these types of projects, but they haven't finalized a policy yet where I can say, per their policy, the county would participate 50% or 75%, or that's unknown. But if we're, looking to do a project in 2020, it is something we would need to get started on sooner than later. The crossing at 86th 6th Street and Deer Run includes reconstruction of a portion of County Road 11 to add a median to create a safe crossing in that location. The speeds are higher there.
Thanks. I don't
Yeah.
think that we need to set money aside for something when we don't even know what the county's policy is going to be yet. So I would suggest we not do that until we know more. The other thing too is we are actually going to fix one of the crosswalks, which was 1843 and 11. And we did hear from the county that unless I'm mistaken, they're going to make at least temporary improvements on Rolling Acres Road for the regional trail. Dana, Trish, do you guys recall? Isn't that right? Wasn't that 2020? Is that?
Yes, that's what they're working towards.
All right, so that's 2 of the 5 crosswalks that we're gonna get, right? I don't think we should, given the other needs we have in the city, I don't think we should set aside money to plan for this particular crossing until we know more about how the cost share is gonna work out. Especially since we do have, it looks like 2 crossings that we can get accomplished in 2020. Council?
I've got a couple of questions. Do we have any sense of when that policy is going to be developed? Is it waiting for us to instigate it, or?
The last information I had was they were hoping to have something done by the end of the year. But
By the end of this year?
oh, sorry. The last information I had was they were hoping to have something drafted by the end of the year, but, you know, I'm not sure what other priorities the county has. The city staff has conveyed to the county that this is an important question that we'd like to have answered so we can start planning and budgeting for the timing.
Okay, so since this planning started before I got here, so we are looking at how many crosswalks down County Road 11?
The locations that have been discussed, there's 3. So one would be at St. Victoria.
And that
So
was-
there's currently a crosswalk there. What we've talked about is adding signage, potentially an RFF, whatever the letters are, where you can push the button
Oh, yep.
and the sign blinks before you cross. And then, as the mayor noted, 1143 and 18, and that'll be improved as part of the proposed project that you all made recommendations to the county on earlier in the year. And then this location of Deer Run Drive and 86th Street. That's really, there's no sidewalk along the west side of Deer Run Drive, and so really a lot of people coming from the south part of our city cross there to come into downtown. So they come off the residential streets and are running across a 45-mile-an-hour road.
I was almost killed in that intersection a couple of times in the past 10 years. So that thing is near and dear to me, that it is very dangerous. And I would say we should implore, if we can't put in a safe intersection, the county should reduce the speed limit to 30. I mean, it's got to be one or the other. You know, there's no real crossing there.
Well, and my other question would be, if we decide to take if we delay some of these street overlays, what does that look like to get the improvements? So oftentimes as we're planning for these street overlays, the roads actually last a little longer than we think they should, so maybe we can push this out and get this thing accomplished without creating any concerns.
Yeah, so one of the things we want to do is be revisiting our overlay timing to take a look at actual conditions on the ground, so we aren't needlessly programming them sooner than later. But the $11 million in need is way above what's even programmed and collected in the fund, so you're still going to have a gap even if you are successful in dragging things out a little bit longer.
So this is a gap. This is 11 million that we haven't incorporated into our transfers into that fund.
That's correct. So
Okay.
we've programmed over the next 10 years
This is
to,
so, right, but if
11
they
is
say we will have to increase
we would have to
general
increase.
fund transfer into that fund to even bite off a piece of this, which means you're going to have to put pressure on the tax rate.
Right, because this 588,000 is not programmed into our long-term
I'm talking about
financial
the
plan.
10-year, 11
Oh,
million.
you're talking about the 11.
Yes, so we have programmed in the 11 million.
So the 11 million is
Yes,
programmed.
it is programmed in. But the 588 is not, which is why the question comes to you about the future overlays and replacing some of that money used to do the pedestrian crossing.
I think Judy wants to speak.
Sure, Judy.
I do. I had a lot of emails sent to me when I was campaigning and since about that crossing over there at Deer Run. And when we picked the alternative for the 1843-11, and nobody liked it, but they kind of took the lesser of the three evils. I did some research and I came up with some ideas. And I reached out to Randy Maluchnik.
Oh.
And I presented these ideas to him. And he said, let's have a meeting with the county engineer. And that's on the 25th. So I was hoping to be able to come back to council and let you know what I thought we could accomplish. So I just want you to know I was working on it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and for the benefit of Judy and Deb, the 5 crosswalks that started before you guys were on the council included at the end of 18 and on Bavaria Road at 18 and 82nd Street, a roundabout there, because that's a dangerous intersection. Another one was over further down south on 43 across, is it Woodlands? When we went out there, was it Woodlands? Is that the right neighborhood?
No, west,
Gallery.
Gallery, thank you. Because that road's also fast, and they come around the corner, and there's no lights so that was one of the crosswalks. We talked about Rolling Acres Road, we talked about 11, 18, and 43. The other one was this Deer Run crossing, so that was one of the 5.
Okay.
I agree that this needs to be done, and I would love to include it if we can figure out the way to fund it without having to dip into borrowing if it can be avoided. But there's also other options. If it's that expensive, I want to find out how much the county wants to pay first. And then secondly, let's just assume for the second they say none, is there another option such as maybe the city putting a sidewalk in along the road to avoid having to cross it, to get down to where they are going to have safe crossings at 11, 18, and 43? I don't know if that's feasible or practical, but before we go and start committing money to this, I'd like to know what, in fact, the city's going to have to pay, and then if this is the only option to actually get a safe crossing. But agreed, either way, we're going to have to fix this crossing and make it safe for people. Judy, go ahead.
So let me do the meeting, and then I'll come back and report to you what I think we can get accomplished. Because when I saw that, I kind of went, what?
Right.
So, and that's just for across Deer Run.
All right, so is there a consensus of council not to set money aside until these couple of other things happen, at least specifically to answer Trish's question for tonight?
Well, isn't this just a CIP, it's not actually setting,
Well, she's asking, she wants us to,
$500,000 is gonna come from if we wanna do this pedestrian crossing. That's the question, right?
right.
We wanna set aside this 588,000.
So it would be one way that we would be able to fund that project if the project were to move forward. You're not approving the project tonight.
what is the way?
Sorry?
To start, she's asking whether or not we want to actually start setting money aside towards that goal. What I'm saying is, I don't think we should start setting money aside until we know whether or not we're even going to have to pay or what we're going to have to pay.
Mr. Mayor, you're assuming if the county knows we're saving money, they're not gonna, yeah?
Well, that was kind of in the back of my head, but now that it's out there.
I think the county, would be ridiculous if the county wouldn't help pay for some of this. This is a county road.
Exactly.
This helps the whole
System.
You know, the traffic's coming in too fast, and there's no real crosswalk, and the people at Deer Run can't get out unless they go out there, unless you go down Woodstone, and then you're walking down 43, and you'll be killed sooner, rather than later. So,
this is a safety issue.
Well, let's not get in, I think we're all in agreement that we want to see something done. What it is and the design and the options, I think we have to take up at another time. I think simply for tonight, we need to answer Tricia's question. Do we want to set money aside for this now or wait until we have more information?
would you say set money aside, Trish? Would you, you're talking about the whole thing, or should we start setting 50,000 a year aside, so that we can do, well, that would take too long, it would have to be.
Take too long. If we set this aside, this could possibly take care of the 3 side crosswalks that we're trying to accomplish. Possibly,
Well,
but by not setting anything aside, then we come up with a decision, and then we're gonna have to figure out where to come up with the money. Whereas right now, if we don't use it, then we can put it somewhere else. I think we should keep it there.
When we say setting aside, where is the money coming from that we're setting aside?
So, Mayor, members of the council, it's more, it's kind of more for your consideration. The funds are there. We've been setting money aside for the long-term street maintenance fund. The question just comes up because when these types of projects come up, we keep dipping into that pool of funds, which then in coming years, we're having to make that transfer from the general fund even larger to cover where we're now missing for future overlays. So it's just for your consideration that if we were to use these funds, we would have to either increase the general fund transfer or delay those overlays.
So,
okay, so it's a trade-off.
Right, so
You need.
it wouldn't be a 2020 budget impact to the general fund. It would be for future overlays. We have enough in that fund to do the current work that we need to have done. And this pedestrian crossing, if that is what you would prioritize.
How much is
For
it in
2020.
the long-term street maintenance fund right now? Ballpark,
what's the, yeah.
the
Don't,
nearest million.
it's over $1 million. I don't have the exact dollar amount.
It's, so,
Or what's in
according
that?
to this,
Because this isn't going to have the balance.
we've got, am I reading this right? $4 million in Steiger Lake Lane West improvements in 2020?
So we're going to talk about those street projects coming up here in just another minute, and we'll talk about those. So if you want to move on from the long-term street maintenance fund, you can still consider whether or not that project's going
I
to.
would just go on the record, I think this project is really good, and it's very expensive, and I think there's something basically that should be done about the numbers. But if there's only $1 million in the street fund, I wouldn't want to rate it for this. That would be imprudent.
Right.
So,
Right. I think simply,
on the other hand, this is a really good project.
so I think we all agree we want to do that. And I would agree we wouldn't raid the fund if there's that much. I think we just wait until we find out what the county's policy is going to be, and then we can actually look at it. And if we don't have funds, right, then we can figure out how to fund that at that point, or start, if we did ended up having to dip into it, at that point, we could start putting more money out of the general fund to replace that. But we don't even have all the information yet to make an informed decision. So for now, unless the council disagrees, I would suggest we not divert any more money. We can come back to this, and I imagine this will come back in early 2020 anyways for the council to look at once we have the county's policy. And you've met with Randy Maluchnik, right?
Geez,
Yes.
no, you haven't
Right.
had the meeting yet, have you?
No, it's on the 25th.
Okay, so we're gonna know more
Yes.
for
Right.
the next meeting.
Okay. So Tricia, let's go ahead and keep going.
So the next slide is about Marsh Lake Road. And staff's question here is, council comfortable leaving funding plan as is for now for Marsh Lake Road? The council, or staff recommends that the council would bond for the road project. A portion of the cost could be assessed per city policy, which would reduce the amount needed for bonding. And the CIP will be adjusted as necessary to reflect final costs. Kara spoke a little bit about that we're getting really close to actually getting some numbers on it.
That's just an estimate.
A question regarding the assessments. What's our policy on assessing street improvements?
50/50, isn't it?
Mayor, members of the city council, per the city's adopted policy, 50% of the street and storm sewer costs are, I'm simplifying, are assessed to adjacent property owners. But that policy is a little bit more complicated when you're talking about a road that's more of a thoroughfare. So what I can tell you is historically for every street improvement in the city, including Smithtown Road, 78th Street, Cochia, 86th Street, a portion of the project costs were assessed to the benefiting property owners. So once we have an actual cost estimate, I would apply our assessment policy methodology to see what those assessments might calculate out to. But we also have to take into consideration state statute that limits the amount that you can assess a property. You have to do a benefit test. The improvement, the amount you assess needs to not be greater than the benefit added to the property as a result of doing the improvement. But every street improvement project that's been done in the city since the city adopted the policy in 2003, some portion of the costs have been assessed to benefiting property owners. So obviously the council will need to make that decision once you have actual facts and information and numbers in front of you. But you know, homes on 78th Street maybe paid $11,000 for that road improvement. Smithtown Road, I'd have to go back and look. That was probably in that order of magnitude. It's somewhat complicated when you're talking about a road like this, so we'd have to do the analysis, but that's too long of an answer to your question.
And basically, the first bullet point is the key here. In the budget, there's planned to borrow $2.4 million.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions on Marsh Lake Road? Okay. So now we move on to the 13.5 acres. So this addresses your question about the $4 million in the CIP for infrastructure to develop through the 13.5 acres. And question being, is council comfortable leaving these funds in the CIP as is? Staff will be bringing discussion to council in early 2020 to talk about the 13.5 acre development and the road connection. We may need to use a portion of the $4 million in 2020 for feasibility level and or design work if the development is certain.
So the 4 million, that's just, that's not roads only. That's stormwater, park, pond, or whatever it is.
Infrastructure.
Yep,
Infrastructure for that.
yeah, that's correct.
So, yes?
Yeah.
No,
Everything.
I heard. Yeah, so,
Yes, that's correct.
so people shouldn't think this is a $4 million road project.
That's correct. No, it is not a $4 million road project. I think the road piece of it was, now I hate to guess, but it's not. No, that was for the entire project.
So I want to make sure I understand this. Is it in the plan for 2020 to borrow $4 million for this?
So, no. So we are not looking to bond in 2020 for the entire $4 million. It's going to be development related.
It's gonna be what?
So if the city ends up having to pay for and put in infrastructure, that's an additional $4 million lift that the taxpayers have to cover. That's not in the budget as it is today.
That's correct. It's not in the budget.
And this is what we were hoping to get the $2 million grant from the Metropolitan Council to offset that $4 million lift, correct?
That's correct.
How much of this can we recover from the developers?
So Mayor, members of the council, there are still a lot of unknowns here. We know that we didn't get the LCDA grant, and so part of what we're doing is going back to the table with those developers that we've got pre-development agreements with to say, what's your level of interest in continuing to move forward, and what does that look like? And so we've also got to get some feedback from the Met Council in terms of what was missing in our grant, so we can bring information back to you to say, okay, here's all this information. What do you want us to do? We either got developers that are continuing to be committed or developers that are looking to change our vision or whatever that might be, so you can give us some feedback and some direction on what to do next. So if we've got this shown in the plan, because if development is certain, you're gonna have to make that road connection, get the infrastructure and utilities to the site so those properties can develop. And at the time of preparing this, it was looking like development was likely. And so the initial feedback that we've gotten from those who've been at the table with us recently is that there still is a level of interest, but that level of interest is currently suggesting that we might want to go out for another round of application next year to try to keep these costs low. So to, again, try for an LCDA grant. So that's information that we're gonna bring back to you the first quarter. For planning purposes, we're looking for direction from you to say, do you want us to show this in the financial plan? It doesn't necessarily mean we're gonna bond for $4 million. And any bonding we would do, if that happened in 2020, those payments wouldn't start until 2021. And so if something were to happen, we'd want to have some sort of funding available and shown so we know what the impact would be on our budget. But really, the budget impact comes in 2021 or later. But we want to show that expense happening in 2020 because it's possible that could happen. And if developers, let's say, were to walk away, another conversation that you all would have that we'd bring to the table would be, what do you want to do? Do you want to risk laying that infrastructure and providing that infrastructure as a catalyst to development, to attract, because that could be a game changer, should these developers not work out with them. So all things for you to think about, but for purposes for the budget and what we're showing, this is kind of to guide us so we can see impact order of magnitude as we go forward.
Because this is a strategic priority for this council, I think we need to keep it in as a placeholder, for sure. And then at the time that we've got a project, we can make a decision, but I think it has to be a placeholder, so we're preparing.
It's possible that it might be a little bit more realistic to put this over 2 years, because we're not gonna build all that infrastructure in 1 year.
Well, a CIP's for 5, isn't it?
Right, but I mean, this is in here for 1 year in 2020. So
It'll just carry over
at a minimum, I'd spread it out over 2 years, but you talk about it being an incentive. Putting in the infrastructure is an incentive for the developers. We also have the land.
That's true.
So the 4 million exists even though we've got land. So that implies that we're gonna sell the land, or what does it imply?
It doesn't, it just, options.
Okay.
You've got options and decisions to make that, and you're absolutely correct. We've got the land, we own the land, and
And it's paid off,
we're open, yes,
Paid
that's
off,
correct.
yes.
Yeah, but we've got $2.7 million into that land, the city?
Roughly.
Roughly. All right. All right, let's move on.
Okay, so the next steps for the CIP would be, we'll have another workshop in a couple weeks here on the 25th and adopt the CIP on December 16th at the council meeting. So we're gonna just shift real quick. I know we're getting short on time. Where is our workshop? Ann's going to pull it up here. So we're going to talk about the enterprise fund budgets next, and Ann's going to find it for me here. But the Victoria Recreation Center budget is the first for discussion. Membership increases are due to, we did have a price increase in 2019, and we also had an increase in memberships. The operating lease is through the school district as the other source of revenue. As far as expenditures, we have a capital outlay planned expenditure of $50,000 for security cameras and a locker room upgrade. There was an expenditure increase in the cleaning services. We went from in-house to a contract service. So Rosalind's cleaning currently is cleaning the rec center, the city hall, and the water treatment plant. Thank you, Ann. The ending fund balance for 2020 will be expected to be at $1,035,000. This just kind of shows quickly what we just went through with the ISD lease revenue and the increase in membership.
Hold that a second. All right, thanks. I was just trying to read it. You were a little too fast, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
That's right, go ahead.
And then are there any questions on the expenses, or Ann, do you have anything to add about the rec center?
Not unless somebody has some questions. Happy to
It's
answer.
basically paying for itself now?
Yes. We no longer have any tax dollars going to this.
Okay, then we're going to move on to the water fund budget. As we just talked about, there was some capital outlay planned for 2020. But as far as revenues, we are not anticipating, or we are not going to raise the rates for 2020. The last increase was effective in 2011. However, the Minnesota Department of Health did increase their charges. It's a pass-through charge that we put on our bills that we pay back to the state. So that will be going up from $159 a quarter to $243 a quarter. The interfund loan repayment for the 13.5 acres was fully repaid in 2019, so that no longer will be coming out. And as far as expenses, we're looking at the well siting, construction of well number 5. If that happens, it would be 1.330 in bonding. And then the South Area Utility Extension, we would pay cash at $570,000. This leaves us with a year-end 2020 available cash of $841,000. Any questions about water?
Yeah, why wouldn't we use more of that cash to cut down on the bonding for well number 5?
We do have other projects that are going to be coming up that we will use cash for. So we're planning to bond for the well 5 to save that cash for future expenditures.
What projects?
What projects? So we have, back in the CIP. I'll go back to water. Okay, so we have a portable generator, emergency generator for $93,000. And what else do we have planned? We have the possible trunk water main oversizing for $112,000. And we have another generator in 2021 for $55,000.
Wasn't there $850,000 in cash, though?
It's not, but staff just doesn't recommend spending, the cash down.
So, Mayor, members of the council, as we've talked about before, our AAA bond rating is something that we hold very near and dear to our heart, because when we do have to go out for bonding, we get competitive rates, we get a lot more people bidding on our bond issuance, and our costs to borrow are number of basis points lower. So there is a benefit to holding that AAA. One of the things and one of the notes is our financial strength relates specifically to fund balance. So we want to make sure that we have healthy fund balances and that we're not having huge dips because that does count against us. So we want to make sure that we're carrying a healthy fund balance, but spending down cash where we can to reduce the amount of bonding that we need to do. And it's a balancing act. And so Tricia and I and the rest of the team, when we go and look at these things, we're trying to achieve the PAYGO places where you want to be PAYGO and balance what we're bonding with what our available cash is. And so those are all things that we're looking at regularly and routinely when we're bringing these financial plans to you.
Are those fund balances, how do they determine those? Are they a percentage of your overall budget? How do they determine those? Is it some kind of a factor?
Councilmember McMillan, Mayor, members of the council, it's a very good question. And you do have a fund balance policy that the council adopts. And so there's several different fund balances. And so your policy requires us for our operating fund to have 30%. In our other funds, we want to make sure that we're looking out, like we said here earlier, you're voting on a 5-year or adopting a 5-year plan. We're looking out 10, 15, in some cases 20 years at what our needs are. And when you're saying that you want to be PAYGO or you have certain priorities that you want to achieve, and we know that we're growing, we want to be able to balance and plan for all of those things. So we're looking at what happens when we spend down that money. So what happens if we dip to $300,000 in that fund balance instead of $800,000? What does that look like in our out years when we've got large capital expenditures that you might not be seeing on that 5-year plan, but we're seeing in year 6 or 15? So those are things that we're looking at, which is why we mentioned in the beginning, you're getting the 5-year snapshot. We're behind the scenes looking at a much longer term plan to make sure that we've got adequate funds to fund all of our needs, not only now, but into the future.
Got it, thank you. Council questions?
We're going to be looking at purchasing land for water treatment, and we're finding that could be very expensive, but where does that fall?
I'm going to let our city engineer respond to that.
Councilmember Gregory, everyone else. So when we were hoping that we were going to find adequate water opportunities in the south growth area, we had talked with the landowner from the developer associated with the Welter property about through the development process, obtaining from some land for a future water treatment plant. That location is shown on the city's comprehensive plan. We're no longer thinking that we want to go that direction since we didn't find the water supply that we were looking for in our initial work. So don't know the answer to that yet about where we might want to locate that plant. Now, the need for the plant is some number of years into the future. I'm in the process of getting some updated projections for that as the city starts to undertake a rate study, but it's a ways out there in terms of becoming a reality, so.
So are you saying we're not going to do some exploratory drilling for water in the coming year?
No, we'll continue to do that, but Councilmember Gregory was asking about purchasing land for a water treatment plant.
Right, okay,
So,
excuse me, but the exploratory drillings could be 30 to 50,000 apiece.
correct, that is
What would have to come out of
included,
that water fund?
correct, and that's included in that $1.33 million placeholder for well number 5. We don't have a real number for that, but that would be included in those funds.
Okay, so, and just a quick note too to add, while the general fund does have a policy to have a 30% end of year cash balance of the next year's expenses, the enterprise funds don't necessarily have that strict of a policy. However, the city has always kind of kept that across the boards to have those funds available for the following year because of the restriction, with quarterly billings
So
that we might have.
I don't want to corner you here, but I'd like to know if the council would consider dropping that percentage. At what point would it negatively affect the bond rating? Oh, you have
Mayor,
an
members
answer
of the
already?
council, I can answer that right now. It's 30%.
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
All right, so that 30% was done by design then?
Correct.
All right, got it. All right, thank you.
Okay, and then if we may just have like 10 more minutes to finish this up.
9, 10.
So you'll see in the expenses for the water, sewer, and stormwater funds that we are proposing to do a rate study. The water rate study went from a quarterly base to a quarterly plus tiered usage in 2008. I mentioned earlier, since then,
Move the slides up.
it's kind of to do with this revenue piece, but so there has not been any increases in since 2011. So for future growth, we would like to take a look at those by doing a rate study. And the proposed rate study would be $9,950 for the water fund. It would be the same for the sewer fund. And then the stormwater, we have put in $20,000 into the budget for the stormwater fund. We don't have an actual quote on that one. It takes more engineering for that rate study. So one of our questions tonight was, Council, what are your thoughts on doing the rate study for 2020?
And Mayor, members of the council, before you answer that question, and just a couple other comments on that. So it is best practices for city to do these studies. What we are looking, or what we would be looking at, is not just to get a report that we're gonna dust off and put on the shelf. We're looking for a modeling tool, and that's what we would get. The cost to us, whether we get a static report or a modeling tool, is the same. So for us, if we've got a modeling tool, when you ask questions about, well, what if we increase the base rate, or we're looking at different tiers, we can model that out and see how that affects revenue over years. If we've got large projects or large growth infrastructure, we can predict out what our rates need to be, when we can hold them steady, or can we do an incremental increase, not to have large spikes, but to be able to accommodate our future needs. And so these are, they put a little bit of data decision-making, like data-driven decision-making into some of these rate decisions and policies that you'll be setting, and you've got some real meat and real data behind the purpose and that the cost, or what those rates are, that you can point back to.
When was the last time we did one of these?
2011, right?
Well, 2011 was the last time we changed the rate.
The rate study was done in 2007.
Wow.
So is this just utility bills and whack and sack, or just utility bills?
We are going to have them look at the development fees as well as the water and sewer stormwater rates to the residents.
But this will give us a modeling tool so that we can do this from this point on, so we don't have to keep paying people to look at stuff.
Exactly.
That's correct.
Because that just drives me nuts. Okay.
Yep.
Any objections, agreement?
No, none.
Sounds good. Water is
Sounds
precious.
reasonable.
Yes.
All right.
So quickly, the sewer fund, again, the ending available cash, we're looking at roughly 800,000. Trying to keep some of our 30%, close to our 30% cash balance at end of year. We will have a 2% rate increase for 2020. That is a rate increase that we have been doing just to try and keep up with the Met Council. However, the Met Council has been exceeding that 2%. As this year it was 3.6%.
So, Mayor, members of the council, Tricia, sorry for interrupting. So just to give a little perspective there, as the Met Council increases their rates, if we don't increase our rates, we're subsidizing that, which means it's eating into our ability to do the stuff that we've planned to do. And so, and we push back, and other cities push back on Met Council to say, you gotta put the brakes on things. You can't keep raising things 12 and in double-digit percents, which historically has happened. Now, this year, we were lucky that their increase was way less than anticipated, but historically, they've been increasing, and that eats away at our costs and our ability to do things. So if we're not pacing at that same rate, which we haven't been.
So, excuse me, is that going to put the city in a precarious position at some point? We're falling behind, sooner or later we pay the piper. So what is the reason we wouldn't try to keep closer to the Met sewer rate so we don't develop a problem? Because, you know, these projects are millions of dollars.
And council member vote, mayor, members of the council, that our rate study is gonna help us look at that, but also the cities have had a pretty strong voice and have been pushing back. And since the cities have kind of united and pushed back, and Met Council actually 2 years ago did look at their rate, did a rate study, and things have stabilized. But we wanna make sure that, that our base rates are adjusted and that we can still do just because the Met Council increased at 12%, for example, I'm not saying they did, but if they, doesn't mean we should automatically do that. We should look at what we're trying to do and how that affects us, and we should have those discussions. But we don't necessarily just wanna, because they went up, we go up.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that somebody's asking the Met Council for some justification on these cost increases. You know, the Met Council is not in business to make money, so that's a curious trend.
And I do have a question.
Essentially, since we have limited voice on the
So-
Met Council.
Indeed.
So when they go up, is that to us or to the resident? The sewer fund? That's in the water bill, right?
So both, it's both.
So they're increasing to the property owner and us?
Just us.
No, we pay the Met Council. So we are billing the residents. So we're paying the Met Council. So when they increase it, the 3.6%, the city's payment goes up the 3.6%, but we are raising the sewer rates 2%.
So we're
Falling behind.
We're falling behind. That's, yeah, it's eating it away at our ability to do our projects.
Okay,
So the rate study will help us look at this and
right,
figure out a
and
modeling tool so that we don't end up eating that and subsidizing it, correct? That's the bottom
Correct.
line here.
Mayor
Yeah.
and members of the council, to Councilmember McMillan's point, through the LMC and the policy committees that we sit on, metropolitan governance is one of those. And that's solely dealing with these types of issues, and the Met Council does have representation on there. And it's been a good opportunity for cities like us to voice concerns, so they're hearing firsthand at how these things are impacting. So the Met Council does have they do presentations, they're on the hot seat for all of those policy committee meetings.
Okay.
okay, and then the stormwater fund budget. We are looking at an ending available cash balance of $360,000 at the end of 2020. We're planning to increase the rates from $25 to $27 per quarter. We don't have any capital outlay planned for 2020. But again, the proposed rate study, we're just estimating that to be at $20,000.
Is that going to be a modeling one also?
That's correct, yes.
I'll raise the perennial issue. We've got 90 stormwater ponds.
Yeah.
They're all gonna be in trouble. $360,000 isn't gonna cover it. So at some point, we should try to do something.
Councilmember Bo, Mayor, members of the council, that's, we will be proposing in 2020 budget, we have identified funding that would allow us to undertake a study. That would be in conjunction with the water and sewer rate study. So we've got that information.
Okay, so just to kind of wrap things up here, we have our next steps. The public hearing on proposed budgets and levies, November 25th, and we will adopt the levy budgets and CIP December 16th.
And I just want to clarify, it's not actually a public hearing, it's actually public input. So cities are not required by state statute to hold a public hearing, but we do have to provide a date certain in time for the public to be able to comment on our budget. And so November 25th is the date that we have identified. And of course, throughout, since you started this process in June, at every meeting, the mayor has announced that the public is welcome to comment and invited to comment at these meetings.
And we already went through the question about the rate study. This just touches on the South Area Utility Extension Project and kind of the plans, and if there are any questions or comments about the South Area Utility Extension Project from council.
No, we're just looking for water. Isn't this for the water?
So there's a street portion, sewer portion, and a water portion for that project. And that would be all I have for my part. Do department heads have anything they want to add? Council?
Don't be shy. All right. Dana, Trish, anything else?
I have nothing else.
Okay, at this point, for the public, we've run a little bit over on the workshop. I was asked, we're going to take a short break before we start the council meeting so we can reset some of the video and audio. So we're going to adjourn here in just a moment, then we'll start the council meeting at 6:45. So council, can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Second, please. Discussion, hearing none. All in favor of adjourning the workshop signify by saying aye. Aye. Workshop is adjourned.